All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Q&A. We have Dale Sellers and Karl Vaters. And so if you don't know them by now, hopefully you know them. You should know them if you're here, and you should know me a little bit. So instead of going into long introductions and telling us what we do and who we are, we're going to get right into the questions because we have a lot of questions and we want to make sure that we're able to answer it and give you some insights and some wisdoms that help you along the way. But before we do that, let's just say a quick hello. Say hi, Dale.
Hi, Dale.
And Karl, say hi.
Hi, guys. Good to be with you.
All right. And it's good to see everyone. All righty. So let's get right into it. So the first question, and I'm going to kind of summarize it a little bit. I'll read it word for word, but I'll kind of summarize it so we could kind of find the question underneath the question, right? So first question was, how can I introduce the idea of needing and creating a new vision and a mission statement to the leadership team of an old church that isn't open to change? These are quotes, by the way. So this is talking about leading change and leading change within the board or the elders or the leadership team that is a bit not willing to budge a bit, right? They enjoy the traditions and how they got here, but maybe they're not looking forward to exploring how to get there. And so maybe Dale, we'll start off with you. Any thoughts on that, since that was kind of your topic of vision and mission?
Well, you have to explain why you exist, which is your mission. And then if you don't know why you exist, then vision and everything else beyond that really doesn't come into play. I will tell you this, that if you're in a church that is deeply ingrained in doing what we've always done and unwilling to change, you're probably not going to be able to change them. And it's just an honest truth. And we want to be honest today. If they are locked down and they don't want to change, one of the things that I like to talk about is the fact that when I grew up in high school, 90% of all the people who came to Jesus did it before their 19th birthday. And now the statistics are even lower, somewhere around about before age 20, about 98% of all the people come to Jesus. So if you want to be an evangelistic church and you want to reach people and you want to change the community, that you're going to have to reach the next generation. And you can't do that by continuing to do what you've always done. But I have to be honest, if some churches are very ingrained and unwilling to change, and they're most likely just going to die. And so, Karl, you want to jump in on that one too?
One kind of counterintuitive secret that I learned a few years ago was instead go deeper into your church's foundations. If you've got people who are like, this is not the way we do it at our church, we don't want to do it the new way, don't fight the foundation of the church. Go into it. Find your founding documents, because you will find statements in your founding documents that are inspirational and forward-looking. We want to reach a new generation in a new way, that kind of thing. You won't find things like, we're determined to worship Jesus on this color carpet until Jesus comes again. You won't find dead, stale statements in your founding documents. You'll find pioneering statements in your founding documents, because pioneers start churches. So you can honor the attitude of your founders by doing new things if you tie it to their founding statements.
And I want to add this as well to piggyback that. A lot of churches in the region of country that I live in started as splits. So you may not be able to find those founding documents. So I mean, if your church started as a split, what I believe is that the DNA of splitting is already inside you. And so if you don't deal with that, and sometimes that means going back and dealing with why the church split, if that stuff is still there, it'll be very difficult moving forward. So I hope we're being honest with everybody going, this is an uphill battle.
And some of the things that we've noticed is that some pastors are hired as a hired hand, right? Yes. So the elders or the deacons, they lose the senior pastor. They're like, I'm going to hire someone to do what we need them to do. And you become a hired hand. Mm-hmm. And you do the chaplain, you show up to all the things. They just want you to help them to kind of finish their the end of life, in a sense. I mean, again, we're being really honest and truthful here, mm-hmm. right? However, that's not our role. Our role is to bring leadership and bring vision and bring God's vision to the church. And so sometimes the leadership, that team that you have, may not be the right leadership team to carry you forward. And so that's a really kind of tricky area, because it may be too hard to break through, but you want to stay fixated on the vision that God has given you for the church and the vision that God has given the church. And maybe there needs to be some adjustments in the leadership team. Now, based upon which denomination and how your governance is structured, that might be difficult. But those are some really reality questions that you have to ask, which leads us to another question, which is, when do I know when it's my time to go? I can't seem to get traction on anything. The church is slowly dying. So it's not when, but it's more like, should I go? And then if I feel I should go, how should I do it?
I can really address that one because I realized in the 8th year of pastoring the small church that I pastored, I looked around going, you know what? I can't inspire these people anymore to do anything. They loved me. They enjoyed my preaching. They saw me as a friend. They all wanted to be on my team, but nobody wanted to do anything. And I recognized then that we were moving toward the end of my tenure there because I could no longer lead them or inspire them to make a difference in the community. And so, if you're at a place you've been there for a while and you recognize that hey, they're not following you, that might be a good sign that it's coming to an end. Karl?
Yeah, I've been I pastored three different churches and left for three very different reasons. The first one, it was simply our time of life for our family to go. The second one, it was a toxic church that we realized very quickly we could not make any significant changes in. So we left before the 2-year mark. The third one, also difficult, also took a long time to turn around. But here was the key. We've been there 29 years now. The key was everybody was willing, from the leadership to the congregation. It wasn't stubbornness. It was simply very realistic challenges, hurts from the past and challenges in the present. But everybody was agreed on moving forward. So if you can get full agreement, you can stay a long time. It will take a while to turn around. But if you don't have full agreement, either of the leadership or of the body, it's going to be almost impossible. And that was why we left our second church. It was like, there's no agreement here whatsoever. We're just not going to burn our lives out at a place that has virtually no hope of changing.
And one of the things I want to share too that I learned, it took a while to learn as a young leader. When our music group was on the road, that's what I thought I would do forever. We did that 10 years. But then we came off the road and I went into depression for a while because I felt like I'd failed God. There are seasons in ministry, just like there are seasons in the climate around us. And so there are different times when, you press in, but winter does come. And so, you have to recognize the changing of the seasons, and that might be what's happening for some of you.
All righty, great. So another question. We'll handle the oppositional questions first, and then we'll get into future and vision. Okay, so let's tackle the hard questions first.
We may be here all day.
Yeah. And I guess one note that I want to add is they're not bad people.
No.
And sometimes, and they're not our enemies, right? And so sometimes when we feel like we're battling with our own people, it feels like they're the enemy, but the enemy is actually not them. It's actually the one that's dividing the church. And so we just have to remember, we got to learn to still love them, still honor them for the legacy and the sacrifices they made to get the church to this point. And so just want to make sure that we're not kind of categorizing our leadership and our elders as the enemy.
Let me double down on something here, Sam. Well, one of the things that I discovered recently in thinking things through is I felt like when people were pushing their vision to the surface of what they wanted to do, sometimes there are people who just have agendas. I get that. But sometimes the reason that people do that is because they're not sure what we're doing. We haven't, as pastors and leaders, haven't communicated very clearly what our mission and our vision is. So sometimes people will try to get us to do something because they don't know what to do. And we typically, this bears out in two ways. One way is we have all these programs. We have lots of programs going on because we have no idea what we're trying to accomplish. But sometimes as the leader, we're not communicating clearly what the mission of the church is. And very well-meaning people who love Jesus, who love the church, who want to reach the community, they finally get to a place where they're like, well, we need to do something. And if you're not communicating your mission very well as a leader, you will feel that pressure. And you feel like maybe they're being rebellious. They're not always being rebellious. Sometimes it's because we ourselves as leaders are not communicating very clearly where we're going. And, and I have a quote in an article I just wrote that basically says this: it doesn't matter which path you take if you don't know where you're going. And so you got to have real clarity in where you're going. And so I'm so glad you brought that up, Sam, because sometimes we label people as bad and rebellious. And again, I'm not saying that people aren't that way, but sometimes it's because we as the leader are not clearly communicating. So thanks.
Yeah, great. So this goes to our next question. And this is, so based upon what Karl shared, in a small church context, a couple of uncooperative people makes a big noise. How can we best deal with those people and not upset the fellowship? So since they mentioned you, my name, Karl, let's have you answer this one.
Yeah, I think my reference there specifically was the term control freaks.
Yep.
Lesson one: don't try to out control a control freak. It's like fighting over the steering wheel in a moving car. Nobody wins and everybody gets hurt. Typically, when people are control freaks, it isn't primarily simply because they want to be in charge. It is because of fear. Quick example: when I first came to my church, at about the 7 or 8 year point, we finally had things stabilized. We started doing some improvements, and I had one board member who came to me every Sunday, right 5 minutes before the service started, with a list of improvements we had to do. Did you see? They didn't do this. They didn't do this. They didn't do this. And every week he was driving me crazy. I finally thought, you know what? I'm going to beat him to the punch. So every week I went through all the undone stuff, all the problems. And when he came in, I said, hey, let me show you all the problems that I noticed this week. And after a couple of weeks of doing that, he said, you don't need to show me anymore. I can tell you've got your handle on this. And I came to discover in a previous church improvement, the pastor was not on the ball, and they had wasted tens of thousands of dollars that they didn't have. So he was trying to protect the church in the only way he knew how, which was by pointing out all the problems. He was afraid because of history. And when I was able to show him competence, so I didn't push back. I didn't say, quit telling me this before the service starts. That would have just made him angry. I addressed the fear, and that helped him to let go of control.
That's great. That's great. So yeah, so going back, kind of summarizing what Dale and Karl was saying, our people are not ill-intentioned. They really want to see the health of the church. They want to be a part of it. It's just sometimes when there's no clarity on where we're headed, there's no common vision where they could put their hand, they could be a part of. It creates multiple visions, right? So when there's multiple visions or 2 visions or 3 visions, and everyone has a different vision of where the church is going, that's how you create division, right? Multiple visions. And so you want to make sure that you focus on being clear. And one of the best ways to be clear is to just remind them, why we exist as a church and who we're called to reach. All right. So great. Now let's move on to this idea of growing young. So we got a couple of questions of how do we reach young people? Dale mentioned the statistics of a lot of people coming to faith before their 20s. And so growing young is they want to grow the church, but they want to bring the age down, right? That's what I mean by growing young. Mm-hmm. And so let's start with that. This is a question. How do I create an environment that attracts a younger crowd when we're in an old and outdated church building? We have zero funds to update the environment. If we don't attract the younger crowd, our church will die in the next 5 years.
Karl, me?
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, I can jump in that, because I came in my early 30s to our current church, and the church was an old church. It was 50s and 60s, almost exclusively, no young people at all. Now I'm in my 60s, and we have 20-year-olds sitting on the front row, and most of our leadership team is in their 20s and 30s. So our church has grown younger as I have grown older, which is completely, again, counterintuitive, because the kind of common wisdom out there is that you attract people 10 years younger than you and 10 years older than you. But what I've discovered, the reason that isn't because you're the same age as them, is because you're in a common cohort. You've had common life experiences. You like and dislike similar things because you're within the same age range. So it's not about being the same age. When I was a teenager, I didn't understand teenagers. I don't connect to teenagers today. I didn't connect to teenagers then. But what happened was I love them, and so I want to know what they love and what they're attracted to and what their needs are, and they can see that I love them. And so it doesn't matter how old I am. It really matters, do we love the same things? Are we finding some common ground? So in a small church, don't look at creating a youth group. Look for young people who have common things in common that you love. Maybe you love hunting, take them hunting. Maybe you love sports, show up at Friday night football. Maybe you like reading, find the nerds in the local high school and read and form a book club with them. So you're not going for all youth. You're going for youth that have common interests with you, and that crosses age barriers.
Let me give you 3 practical things that I think will be very helpful. The first one, actually, which he didn't bring it up, so I'm going to bring it up, is Karl's church. Karl's church has the coolest skateboard park I've ever seen anywhere in their basic parking lot. And they made it a priority because the kids in their town had nowhere to go to do skateboarding. And so they've done it. And I'm assuming they've got the insurance and everything it takes to make that work. But they literally have kids from all over the community. So see, that communicates outside the building. We care about kids. The second thing is you need to involve, if you have any young people at all, involve them in being part of the leadership of the Sunday morning service. It's like everybody thinks we're preparing for the church of the future. No, the church of the future is now. And so let them help with offerings. Let them help maybe making announcements. Let them help in areas that they can be competent in. Don't just stick them in the sound booth. Let them be seen. Get them on the stage. And then the third, and I think this is one of the most easy things anybody can do, is when you make references to experiences as you're communicating your message, don't just tell stories about when you were a kid. If you're in my age, I'm going to be 60 next year. So if I talk about, oh, back in the 70s, this, or back in the 60s, this, that doesn't relate to kids today. And the reason I know this is I had a 16-year-old girl come to me one day, and she said, I can't stand our pastor. And I thought, well, why did you say that? She said, because he never relates to us. He never tells any stories about what we're going through. And this is a big miss that I see in a lot of churches. Talk about issues that students are facing today. Talk about if you're in a part of society where they're having to deal with the transgender issues, talk about it. Talk about what the Bible says. Talk about real issues that but always make sure you say, now I remember when I was a young person, this was going on, but today's young people deal with this. And if you don't know what's going on, you need to find out what's going on. Those are three practical things I think would be very helpful in reaching and slowly beginning to bring in young people in your church.
Yeah, and
And
when you do mention things today, don't mention it only to put it down.
Yes.
There's a lot of pastors, and the only thing they talk about with today's stuff is what's wrong today. And what youth hear is, well, that must be wrong. What's wrong with me then? So you want to talk about the positive things that are going on today as well. Don't talk about the good old days then and the bad old days now. You'll completely cut them off.
Yeah, that you won't reach.
Yeah. And a lot of times there's a misconception that the environment is what you need to change in terms of the decor and the colors and the spaces. It does help, and it does maybe attract them, but it doesn't retain them if you don't have a connection with them.
Hey, Sam.
And so
I'm sorry.
go ahead, Dan.
Well, today, all older buildings, older architecture, authentic old thing, actually is a draw. I mean, I've been, and it broke my heart to do it, but I've actually been in churches that are or been in buildings that are now breweries where they're selling beer and burgers that used to be churches. And so it's not about the aesthetics necessarily. So keep on going. I'm sorry, I didn't cut you off.
So yeah, and my I spent a few years working for a church design firm, right? And so a lot of times they're like, we want to make it young and hip or make it a black box. That doesn't keep the young people there. It might bring them there, but it won't keep them there. And so you have to understand how to create connectivity and connection with those that are coming. And then we're talking about young people, like the teenagers and the students and the young adults, but also with young families. It's really important to realize that if you just keep it safe, keep it clean for their children, that's enough. And so you don't really have to invest tons of money on the latest and greatest fatty kind of design and make a cool coffee shop feeling look. Obviously, Karl would say you should, but because he loves coffee.
No.
But the thing is, the vibe is only the entry point. The connection is what's important. And one of the things that I've learned, I was part of a leadership where we merged with an older congregation as a younger church. And what we learned is that our young families, I'm going to talk about the younger families, because I know a lot of you are trying to reach young families, is that they're looking for sages. They're looking for mentors. They're looking for grandparents that's going to come alongside them and share their life experiences of how they were able to raise their kids well, how they were able to do their vocation well, how they were able to retire. So there's a lot of wealth that you have in your church that is a need of our current young families. And so don't look at like, oh, we just need to make our building look better, but look at what you have in your hand, as Karl Vaters said with the Apollo 13 illustration, right? You have so much. And so if you could lead out with that, create a marriage seminar where those who've been married for 40 years could share about what they've learned, and tips and tricks of how to have a healthy, strong marriage. So those are some things just to kind of throw, because I know a lot of people like, we don't have money to make our place look cool and hip to attract young people. Sometimes that's the wrong question. The question is, what is God given us in our congregation? What is the gems with our older congregation that we could do to connect with the younger families? And when you connect with younger families, guess what? Younger children come as well. All right.
And
So
and
go
and real
ahead.
quick, in addition to that, you can build a creative and dynamic church on seniors if you are intentional about it.
Mhm.
This seniors group is a fast growing group right now, but
Mhm.
the key to remember that, I've got a 4-word key to that. You got to remember, Grandma went to Woodstock.
I love that. Oh God.
So you have to be thinking in different ways, even about seniors. You've got to update your seniors ministry, and if you do that, and you think about the Woodstock generation, you can have a dynamic church primarily with seniors, especially if you're in an area that is predominantly seniors around you. Now, if your church is filled with seniors and your community is filled with young families, then you've got a problem. But if you are living in an area where the community itself is graying, you can have a very healthy, strong, dynamic church filled with seniors. You just got to do it in that right way.
That's great. That's great. Well, talking about marriage and things like that. So one of the questions we got here is, seems small church pastors are short on staff and volunteers, so we have to carry more of the workload. That can have an effect on our home lives. What are some routines that have helped your marriage stay healthy over the years?
Well, both of us can address this, but I'm going to say the first problem you probably have is you're trying to do too much. I say all the time, it's better to be known in the community as a church that does one or two things really well instead of 20 things poorly. And so what happens is when you try to offer all the same services or ministries that the church down the street with 800 or 1,000 members offer, you're probably going to wear yourself out. And in a small church, we tend to pick up the things that everybody else drops. So you may have to look at your ministry and go, okay, we need to pare things down and be more focused. And you need to make one of, I just literally had this conversation on a call just about before here. You look at the things that are important. Well, Sunday morning and the preaching's got to be good, how you connect with people. But as you look at the different things that make up your church, one of the things that should be in those top 5 is your family. So your family needs to be a priority. Your marriage, you need to have a day on your calendar that you honor with your family. You don't need to miss the things that your children participate in because you're off doing something with the church. And you said, well, Dale, but the church expects that of me. Well, I understand that. But the reality is, if you try to do everything and try to please everyone, you won't do anything and please anyone. And so I think one of the things that happens is we don't prioritize our families. When I was a kid growing up, pastors would come through back in the 70s and go, it's God first, then your ministry, then your family. And I would think as a kid, I'm going, that can't be right. And it's not right. It's God first, and then your family, and then your ministry, because ministry is not who you are, it's what you do. And if your calendar is running your life, it's because you aren't running your calendar. Karl?
Date night, keep it and do it. Shelly and I didn't do that for years, and we when our kids were just getting into their teens, we realized we needed to do that. And I'm going to tell you, for the first few years, date night at times made us more miserable instead of more happy, because we had the rule: we can't talk about the kids, we can't talk about the church, and we stared at each other over pasta and went, "What do we talk about?"
So good.
And it took us a long time to figure out how to find things in common that we could talk about aside from those two things. But we didn't give up. We kept at it. So date night, family days, you've got to absolutely do it when your kids are younger. They won't be young for long. You've got to do that with them. And then thirdly, do not allow the church's schedules, even emergencies, to interrupt. I've talked to too many small church pastors who will say, I was on vacation and then I got a call that so-and-so needed me because they were such and such, and I had to cut vacation short. We made a rule early on. No, sorry, that's not going to happen. I mean, if a massive, if an earthquake comes through and the church building is falling down, then maybe we'll show back up home again. But it has to be literal life and death stuff that will pull us off of vacation. Otherwise, you set other people in place who will take care of that as best they can while you're gone. And back in the day when you were on vacation, they couldn't get a hold of you and they had to figure it out. So they're just going to have to get used to figuring that out too. If you don't prioritize your family, then it will not get prioritized, because the church will not cause that to happen. You have to make that the priority.
Absolutely. The church will wear you out. A practical thing that I did when he said date night, I also dated my daughters. Here's 2 things I can give you the practical. One, when my girls were little bitty, for a long time in their lives, they all had a date once a month with dad, no. And so we'd go out and we'd just spend time with each individual kid. So that's a practical thing you can do. And if you can spend time with your kids, whether it's your daughter or your son. And then the second thing that I did was I just made sure that I prioritized that. I told our family, we would go through these seasons, and everybody in ministry has these seasons when you just got so much going on. you're so busy, and I call them grunt times. I don't know if that would translate across to everybody, but just when you're going through a real high busy season, I would sit down with my kids ahead of time and tell them, Dad's going to be really covered up for the next 3 or 4 weeks, but I will make it back up on the backside. And then here's the thing, I honored that.
So the next question talks a little bit more about the balance, right? Or making choices. It says, how do I keep a good balance and boundaries between my pastoral duties and my responsibilities administratively with the board? And so it seems like, the pastoral duties versus kind of the administrative duties.
I'm not sure I know that question really well, so Karl, dive into that one.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is when you're in the board meeting, then you're the kind of the boss of the board, but they are also church members, and so you have to pastor them. That's my guess as to where that's coming from. My quick answer is you never stop being their pastor. You have to be pastoral in the boardroom as well. This whole idea that somehow I lay aside the pastorate to do the business is a false dichotomy that we absolutely have to reject. You are never not the pastor. When I first came to our church 29 years ago, they'd been through 5 pastors in the previous 10 years. And so it took them a while to trust me because they didn't even know if I was going to stick around. But at about the year and a half point, we actually had a disagreement over something. And as we talked through this disagreement, I realized that the board members were actually right and I was missing something. And I paused and I apologized and said, you know what? You guys are right. I'm wrong here. I should have changed that. They two or three of them came to me afterwards and told me that was the moment that they started trusting me again. Because after a mistake, I didn't push back. I actually acknowledged it. And so they saw me living with integrity. They saw me being pastoral. Simple thing. One guy came to me after a year and a half, 2 years on the board. He said, I've been trying to figure out what it is that's different about you than previous pastors. And it just hit me. You refuse to engage in any gossip. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, is that what the previous pastors did? Oh yeah, we'd get there and we'd spend half the meeting talking bad about the congregation members as though it was a pastor thing, as though it's something we were supposed to figure it out, but it was really just gossip. I said, whenever anybody brings up somebody else in the church, you shut it down automatically and you just won't allow, we deal with issues and we don't talk about people. And I didn't even realize I was doing it because it's not pastoral to talk about, especially private issues. So you never stop being the pastor, even when you're doing business. You have to always do it through a pastoral lens.
I think too that maybe some of us view and we run into this a lot with at 95 Network when we work with churches. They view the business side, if I can say it like that, of leading the church as somehow less than your role. And the reality is, if according to the scriptures, you've been put there to be the leader. You are the equipper of the church, and so there is a business side of leading and vision casting and how we're going to get there that is part of that role as well. So I don't know that you should never set aside the role of being the pastor ever, because that is it. It's not either or, it's both and.
Yeah, the admin is not separate from pastoring; it's a part of pastoring.
Yes, that's what I was trying to say. Thank you. It was much better than I said it.
Great.
That's why they got us both here, Dale.
Yeah,
Either one of us on our own, they'd only be getting half the good thing.
Well, we're making some good time with these questions. So, there's an opportunity for you guys to ask questions on the chat. And so if you have questions, I already see a couple coming in. Feel free to add there. Okay. And we'll try to address as many as we can. Let's go into staffing, right? And so I know as a small church, you may not be able to hire people, but one of these questions is, when staffing for a small church, what positions do you think are most important to have as paid staff or volunteers?
Well, all of it depends on your mission and vision. But if I have to pick one, and this will sound weird, everybody. Obviously, you have to have someone to lead music and do music well, if that's part of your experience. If you're a soul winning church, if you're about reaching the lost, you're going to have a youth person or a children's person. If the highest return comes with, in the age groups of 18 and under, you're going to have to minister to those. And so that has to be a priority. But that question is very hard to answer because I don't know the priority of your church. I can't tell you what your mission or vision is, because the Great Commission and the Great Commandment, that's for all of us. But how we carry it about depends on where we are and the makeup of our church and the makeup of you as a leader. And so it's what you prioritize first. I personally believe, we do need to have someone help us do music well, but I really believe that reaching the next generation has got to be a high priority, and that means doing great children's ministry and great youth ministry. Karl can speak to this probably even better than I can.
Yeah, for me, it starts and ends with discipleship. If you are truly doing discipleship, then you will be raising up leaders who will be able to lead the church. God has given his body everything it needs. Some of the parts of the body are not yet equipped to do their part. And so we strengthen that part of the body. Discipleship answers so many of those questions. I'm going to use an American illustration for those who aren't in America or those who aren't sports fans. I'll try to explain as I go through. But you've got in America here, we've got the New York Yankees, the most famous baseball team in the world. They tend to go out there and they got deep pockets. So when they want to improve their roster, they go out and they pay big money to hire the big hitters. And then you've got teams like the Kansas City Royals, which is in a smaller market, smaller team. They don't have the money. So what do? They've got what's called a great farm team. That is the smaller teams in regional areas that they use to develop their own players and bring them up. It takes longer, but it costs less money, and they're developing their own people to step into the roles. And what we've seen in recent years is the hiring the big hitters does not provide the team element. And you've got some teams now that are developing their own and are competing just as well with the teams that have deep pockets and hire people in. So a big churches have larger budgets and they can hire professionals in, and there's no reason why they shouldn't. In smaller churches, you don't have the budget, so you've got to develop your farm team. You've got to have people in the pipeline that you're developing, that you're mentoring, that you're discipling, who will become your leaders. People ask me, if your church grew, all of a sudden, what would you do? You're the small church guy. I can tell you this: if our church doubled in the next year, we could do it without hiring a single person from the outside, because we have developed our own leaders, especially over the last 10 years. They are ready to step in even to full-time roles if we needed them and if we could afford them, but they're doing it now on a volunteer basis. That, to me, I think is a healthier way and is the more likely way, especially for the small churches we're talking to. You don't have the money, so disciple people and raise them up into those positions.
Which, by the way, is what Ephesians 4 tells us to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It happens to be biblical, which is nice.
Yeah, just a thought.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
And just one extra comment is, and usually when I encourage, when they're looking at hiring someone, they need to expand the capacity and the capability of the church. They shouldn't be someone that you just need to delegate things to.
Yeah.
Right. So those are volunteers and things like that. But if you're gonna
when I talk about equipping people and so on, I sometimes I'll have a pastor come to me afterwards and go, I tried delegating and it didn't work because they didn't do this, and I tell them, I didn't use the word delegate. I'm not talking about delegating. You cannot delegate to people that you have not trained. You have to train and equip them first, and only then can you delegate. But some of us have gotten burned by delegating because we've delegated to people we haven't equipped. And that's not their fault, that's our fault. So equip them. That's what the Bible says. It doesn't say delegate, it says equip.
Let me dive in here too, because one of the things that happens is when we are looking for leaders in our churches, we tend to want them to be ready-made. In other words, we want them to come to us already prepared to lead. And typically, if that happens, unless someone moves into your area, it's just because they left one church to come to your church. That is not the way to do it. Everybody needs to understand that before you find a diamond or gold, you have to mine it. You have to go into the dirt to mine it out. And diamonds and gold always come to you with dirt on them. You have to, as a pastor, the equipping process is to get the dirt off to find the value of the diamonds and the golds that are in your church. And every church has got them. Everybody in our church, we are called to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. So make sure you don't make, especially when you follow the model that Karl just told us, which is very much the biblical model. Make sure you're not always looking for people who come to you already as ready-made leaders, because you probably recruited them from somewhere. Not that you recruited them, they probably came to you from somewhere else, unless they moved into your area. Look for the diamonds and the gold and understand you got to help polish them, clean them up, and then release them step by step to becoming the person that God wants them to be.
Yeah. Occasionally I'll have a pastor ask me, where did you find such great leaders? And my answer is, we didn't find them, we made them.
Yeah.
They didn't show up that way.
That's so good. It's true, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not about getting sheep from other sheep pens. That really won't work for you in the long run.
Yep.
Great. Yeah. And also we as leaders have to be developed as well. And so make sure you have that part as well. So going to the next question is great. I mean, this is all kind of leading into each other. So this is about burning out of our volunteers. Even though we are a small church, there's still a lot that needs to happen and be done. Unfortunately, there aren't many to help carry it out. How do we keep those that carry the majority of the weight from not burning out and staying encouraged?
Well, once again, if that's what's happening in your church, you're probably trying to do too much. You're probably
Yep.
trying to offer too many things. Uh, you need to pare it down and really find the one or two things that you do very well. And then what you have to do with volunteers, this is a piece that we teach in our one-day conference at 95 Network. When it comes to volunteers, you have to give an end date to current service. The reason that people will not step up to work in your nursery or your children's ministry is because they feel like it's a life sentence if they do so. And so what I suggest is in the at least in the American church, what we do is we suggest that you build your yearly calendar around the school calendar. So you have a fall semester, a spring semester, and a summer semester that people can sign up and volunteer in. And once they finish that semester, you let them know, hey, if you need to take a break now, you can take a break. I think the other thing you have to understand too, and again, in small churches, sometimes we just need people to step up. But as soon as you can, you've got to get people to opportunities to serve in their area of giftedness or how they're wired with their gifts, because they will tend to be more buy-in and stay with you longer. Again, in small churches, you're like, well, Dale, we just need people to step up. Well, even if you need that, make sure you are communicating with people as soon as we can. We're going to get you into the area of your sweet spot. But the number one reason that these things happen, Sam, is because we try to do too much. So we're always operating from a volunteer deficit.
Yeah. Number one is absolutely what you said. Do less. Churches tend to be overprogrammed. Small churches typically are very overprogrammed. We have too much stuff we're trying to do. So do less. Secondly, what we talked about in the last one, train them better, do discipleship. Thirdly, what you said, expiration date is what I call it. Every service has an expiration date, and it's a guilt-free out.
Yes.
It's not like, I know this is the expiration date, but no, it is a guilt-free out at the end. And if they really know they've got that, that will help. And then along the way, give them breaks.
Yes.
In fact, some people you have to force them to take breaks. The people
Yes.
that are your best volunteers are burning themselves out. And I would rather lose them for 2 weeks than lose them forever. And if you don't give them the 2 weeks occasionally, you will lose them forever. So your busiest people, the people you need the most, are the ones you're going to have to do without occasionally. You've got to force them to sit, to go out for the weekend, to take a vacation with their families or whatever, because they may be operating under the same guilt thing that a lot of us as pastors are. We're not the only ones who feel guilty when we're not working hard.
Yeah.
Usually our best volunteers are that way as well. And so we need to help them with that.
A couple of practical things here, Sam. One of the things you have to do to help, instead of maybe like them serving for 3-4 months straight and then taking a break, sometimes you just build into the monthly calendar that if someone's really committed and they want to serve every week, you have to take at least one Sunday off and just come and sit in the service and just receive and just let God develop you. Just being part of the church and growing. The other thing that's huge, especially in a small church, if you ask people to do things, you've got to make sure you've given them the tools for success. So if someone wants to serve, let's just do a really easy example. If someone says, hey, I'm willing to serve in children's ministry, then you've got to at least give them a budget and a place to meet or however you do church. Because if you have volunteers who are willing to step up and then you don't give them the tools for success, you're frustrating them and you're setting them up for failure. And they'll tend to probably leave the church or step back and not volunteer if you've set them up for failure.
Great. Awesome. So this leads us into the question of finances. With COVID, it's made an impact on a lot of church budgets. And so this question says, our giving has been down since COVID. I am bivocational and has stopped taking a salary from the church so that money can be used for church expenses. Are there resources out there that may be able to help us until our attendance goes back up again? So there's probably a question behind the question as well.
Yeah, this one's a little hard, and the answer is probably a little harsh, and I don't mean for it to be. But the reality is this: if you can't finance what you're doing, maybe either you're not communicating clearly what the vision is, or maybe that season is over for that particular church. What does happen sometimes if you have a specific focus of ministry, sometimes a larger church if they believe in what you're doing, will help you and support you. But if what you're doing is not sustainable, pouring money into it's not going to solve the problem. And so, I thank God, and I love it when pastors can serve in a bivocational uh, way of doing ministry, because at least they're taking care of their family. But some churches, you inherited the church and it was already on a downward trend. And if there's not enough money to keep the church alive, then just throwing money at it's not going to solve the problem. And I know that's probably not what the answer everybody wants to hear. But as far as just resources out there that just put money in churches that are dying, I'm not aware of any. Karl, you got any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, Rick Warren likes to say you can't solve money problems with money. And he's right. You don't solve money problems with money. You solve money problems with better stewardship, with doing less so that you don't have as much that you have to pay for. And again, to me, it always comes back to discipleship. If you've got people who are being discipled and being trained, then you don't have to pay them to do the work. And people who are actually doing the work and helping out tend to be better givers because they see the need and they have a passion for it. So discipleship, a better answer than getting more funds is to do better discipleship. And again, the smaller the church is, the more realistic that is. It's less about the funds and more about the discipling of the congregation.
But just to answer that question specifically, I'm not aware of entities out there that will just give money to churches that are dying. I don't know that exists.
No.
Yeah, there is one that's called Co-Mission from Provisions Group. So I'm not sure if they're still around. They used to do they don't just come and give money, but they usually end up helping them partner with another church to help kind of work together, or they get adopted into another church family. So that might be a resource that might be helpful. All right, so I think there was a question in the chat about tithing. Okay, so how best do you handle tithes and other givings in a small church, bearing in mind that there's too little coming in and you don't want to push people to give? So I guess the question is, maybe we answered it, but yeah, any additional thoughts on that question that's in our chat? It's almost like you don't want to push I think what they're saying is we don't want to push our people to give. But any thoughts on how to do that well, or any thoughts on the question?
Dale is more the money guy than me, so I'm going to have him start with that one, although he's pausing enough that it's making me worried.
No, I have. I mean, it's really. I thought you would just jump on that because it's discipleship 101. If you have people who make up your church that are believers, there is an element of giving. Some churches don't teach tithing, but they teach giving. So I don't. This is a broader question for a larger audience, but there is an element of. And honestly, God owns it all, and so it's all His. Yeah. But if you have a church, here's the bottom line: if people are not supporting you financially, then they don't buy into what you're doing. It's just really that simple. The last thing to come when people come to your church is their money, and the first thing to go is their money. So they're hesitant when they're checking you out. But when people start sowing their finances into a church, it's because they believe in the bigger picture. They believe in the mission and the vision of the church. And so I don't have any problem whatsoever talking about money. There's a guy in the Bible in the New Testament named Jesus, talked about it a lot. But the Bible says where your treasure is, there your heart is also. So if you have people in your church who will not give financially, then they don't treasure what you're doing. They don't believe in the mission and the vision of the church, and they haven't submitted their finances to the Lord. But the only way to solve that problem is specifically through discipleship. And that's why I thought Karl might jump on that one quicker than me, because that's just how it is, and if they're not giving, it's either they haven't been taught to give, or they don't believe in what the church is doing.
So part of a resource is other churches in your area, or other churches in your network or in your space. But sometimes there's something called kingdom competition that you face in small towns with a lot of churches. And so this is a question that came in that says, there are a lot of churches in our small town. It's like we are fighting over people to come to our church. Each one of us has a small congregation. Do you have any suggestions on how we can work together? We are all basically doing the same thing.
It would be great if those that if you ask that question, or if you're listening, you go, yeah, I'd love to know the answer to that. You'll have to be the leader. So someone's got to be willing to break it down. Someone's got to be willing to say, okay, here there are divisions here, or we're not working together. Someone's got to initiate getting together. you have to be very careful when you talk about, because this could lead to people thinking we need to merge the church. You got to be very careful when you lead toward that, because if you, just like we said, if there's more than one vision, you have division. If you have more than one leader, you're going to have division. It would be great to see all these churches begin to work together. It's very difficult to do, though, because each of those congregations were founded for, in some particular way. And again, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times our congregations have been founded in our towns because of church splits. And so if you want to see churches work together, you're going to have to be the person to initiate that. You're going to have to lay down a lot of the things that keep you divided and begin to work together with those people.
And I think it's important to celebrate that there are a lot of churches. We need more churches, actually, right? Because we need all kinds of churches to reach all types of people. And so that's, one of the kind of ways of, like, if you think your church is the only church to reach everyone in your town, you're fooling yourself. It's going to require all of us to work together and reach the people that each church is called to reach in order to reach the whole city, the whole community. And so let's celebrate that there's lots of churches around. But again, I love what you said, Dale, the leadership that's required. Like, you need, we have the your it principle. If you think you need to collaborate, you're it. Start it.
Yeah. So, I mean, God put that in your heart. And honestly, that's the heart of Jesus. That's when he prayed in the garden, and not before going to the cross, was that we'd all be one. And so we do need to initiate that. But I do want to say this. I think as we continue to do what we're doing here, we are seeing a huge shift in the church. At least in America, and it's probably true worldwide, where the small church is actually becoming something that where people want to be part of. They don't want to just come sit and watch and just be a consumer. People are beginning to sense the desire to be a participator. And so, as you said, Sam, there's a lot of churches that have a kind of little different flavor to them. So the need for church, for having churches has never been greater. But to work in a community together, there are a lot of pastoral associations and things like that. And if there's not one in your town, maybe God's calling you to start it. Karl, did you hear that question?
I did. Sorry, I'm in a hotel room here, so they lost me Wi-Fi. They lost my Wi-Fi, and somebody came by to kick us out of our room. So we had to chase them away and get our Wi-Fi back. So I'm back on it again. So I heard most of what that was, but not enough of it to feel like I can respond intelligently.
Give him the question again there, Sam, because I'm sure
So it's about kingdom collaboration. So there's a lot of churches in the area, and it seems that we're more in competition than in collaboration. And so, what are some suggestions of how to work together better?
Yeah, I think I caught the end of Dale's where he said you step up and put out the invitations and start doing that. I think find churches that are doing things that are similar or the same as yours. A lot of the time, we're just simply duplicating, and we'll find it. Like the most evident one in our neighborhood is years ago we did trunk or treat, and we found out that kids were just simply making the church tour on Halloween evening from church to church to church to church, and we realized either we need to collaborate with the other churches, or we just need to do, or we don't need to do that because that need is already being met, and let's find something else that's meeting a need that isn't yet being met. So, and I think we do that on other things too. VBS would be another example where they make the VBS tour every summer. So let's figure out how to either not duplicate what others are doing or combine together so that we can actually have the resources of a large church if a bunch of small churches combine together and actually do the work. So we get the personality of the small church, we get the positives of the small church, we get the resources of the big church if we collaborate. But somebody has to step up. It doesn't happen automatically. A person, a pastor in a community has to say, I'm going to step up and I'm going to make it part of my mission as a pastor to continue to reach out to the other pastors in this community.
Yeah. And one of the best ways to create a convening event is just saying, hey, let's pray for one another. So get all the senior pastors in the area and say, can we come together and pray for one another? And let's pray for each other churches. When you start praying for the other church, it changes you. So those are some real quick, simple, like, don't say, let's come together and figure out how to change the city. Let's just come together to pray together. That seems to be a really great convening thing. And then pray for each other's churches. Oh, that changes everything for me.
And Sam, a practical thing we can do here too is do what we're doing right now. Because as soon as you said get everybody to pray together, I could see all the excuses of why no one ever has time to do that. But maybe you can, at least as a launching point, just have a weekly or bi-weekly Zoom prayer meeting. You know, I mean, this is obviously, it would be better if we were all together in person, but we can't be all together in person. So instead of just going, well, we can't do anything, don't do that. Take advantage of technology to lead those prayer meetings and begin to work together. And honestly, now people are more accustomed to doing Zoom type things. And so that just kind of popped in my head.
Yeah. The churches will collaborate when the senior pastors collaborate. So
Yes.
all righty. So this goes into thinking about the future, right? So now let's go into like what the future of the church is. And I see it as bright and hopeful and amazing. I mean, the harvest is so ready, right? And so, but we could call it challenges, we could call it opportunities, but this was the question. What are some potential future challenges and future opportunities you see on the horizon for small church and pastors?
I'll let you go first, Karl.
Yeah, tons of opportunities. I really believe this next couple of generations is far more interested in authenticity and intimacy than they are in big shows. I think they like to go to big shows. This is also the generation that made Marvel a powerhouse, so they like big shows. But when it comes down, but I think they have a good way of distinguishing between the big show over here that's a nice spectacle and fun for a moment, and actual life that needs to be lived more intimately and more authentically. So I think a smaller congregation has that. The challenges are that there aren't enough pastors thinking strategically about this. They're just doing the same thing and trying to put, you mentioned it earlier, trying to put a veneer on it. Like, let's be the same church we were, but now let's put a fresh coat of cool paint on it and try to look cool, but we're not actually changing anything on the inside. So that's the biggest challenge, I think, is our mindset that we have to shift to understand. We have to reach out to people individually. That's the other thing. New generations, they don't necessarily, they're not a generation per se. They are more individualistic. So boomers like me, we have a generational identity, a very strong generational identity. Gen Z, millennials, Gen Y, they don't have the generational identity that we do. They're much more splintered, which gives us as small churches the opportunity to deal with them much more individually rather than as a cohort group. So as a small congregation, sit down and get to know individual people more than trying to treat them as a people group. And I think you're going to have a better chance to actually reach them.
This is something I've observed in the American church, and so if you're not in America, this still may apply. But I want to address this. So as of the last 6 months, our football stadiums are packed, our malls are packed, our concerts are packed. Pretty much any event outside the church is packed. But in America's churches as a whole, people are not coming back. So if you're writing down notes today, let me just write down this one word because you need to learn this word, and it's called engagement. The reason people are participating in all these things is because they're engaged in it. And what we have learned we're not on the backside of the pandemic, but what we're learning in the midst of the pandemic is a lot of what we were doing before it happened was not engaging people. And we've got to address that issue because people are looking for Jesus. People are looking for hope. They are looking to find the answer to fill that void in their heart. If I could say it like this, people are just as lost now as they were before the pandemic came. But what the pandemic has helped us to see is in a lot of our churches, we were not engaging people. And so you're going to have to find ways to connect with and engage people. I personally believe, along with you, Sam, that I believe that we're about to see one of the greatest revivals or moves of God or whatever terminology you use there, the world's ever seen. But it's not going to happen in churches that aren't willing to engage with people. In our lifetime, the way things have been, the way we've approached church in my lifetime has been come and see. Well, Jesus didn't tell us to tell folks to come and see. He said, go and tell. And so we're going to have to find ways to connect with people outside of our typical religious ways of doing it, to meet people, maybe work with our community leaders, get involved in the community, find ways that meet people with where they are and what they're going, what they're dealing with, because the opportunities have never been greater. And as Karl said, the next generations, they're looking for authenticity. But if you just keep doing what you've always done, I promise you, you're going to be very disconnected.
Great. Yeah. Entertainment gives them kind of this illusion, but they're looking for reality. And I think that's what we have to offer. And so that's great. So this goes into another question about secession. Church researchers say that a pastor can effectively connect with those 10 years older and younger. We could choose to agree or disagree with that. The average age of pastors is mid-50s. What can we do now to change the narrative and help make a smooth and effective succession plan for the next generation of pastors coming up when we pass the torch in decades to come?
You involved
Well,
them now?
yeah,
You dive into this one,
yeah,
Carl. This is a sweet spot.
we just did that. I pastored the church for 25 years, had the same youth pastor for 25 years. And the week after our 25th anniversary of the church, we announced that the youth pastor was going to become the lead pastor and I was going to become the teaching pastor. That is, was our hope. The church had to vote on that, which they did overwhelmingly. So we were able to make that transition. And the reason that happened was a couple of things. First of all, for the 10 years before that, from year 15 on, I looked at it and realized maybe the hardest thing to do in pastoral ministry is to come in after a long-term successful pastorate. That's really difficult to do. And I knew that the person after me was going to have a hard time unless I really prepared the way for them. So I didn't know how to do it, but I was actively thinking about doing it and preparing the church for that by sharing leadership, by not making it all about me, by making sure that we had a strong congregation, so that, because even if it didn't happen according to my plan, if you drop dead tomorrow, you're going to have a church that can pick that up as well. So you will leave at some point. So pastors, we need to make sure the church is not all about us. We need to make sure that discipleship is happening. We need to make sure that strong systems are in place. Here's the deal. If you can't go away for 2 weeks on vacation, you have not prepared your church for the next pastor after you. That's bare minimum. And so it goes back to the whole discipleship thing again. You got to prepare the church for that.
This is one of the issues that blows my mind. And honestly, this has been an issue. This is true in churches of all sizes, from the large churches to the mid-size to the small. And that is, we don't seem to have a succession plan. So many of our churches are built around, whether it's a small church or a large church, it's built around the personality of the leader. And so you have got to, as the leader, begin today paving the way to hand the church off to someone else. That means you don't wait for 10 years and start picking somebody. You involve them now. There is a Baptist church in Georgia. It's called First Baptist Woodstock, and their pastor's name was Johnny Hunt, and he did a great job, I think, where he actually talked to the church about where we've got to start preparing for succession. They went and picked, just like Karl did, the person that was going to be in the succession, and they worked the church through a several-year process of him decreasing and bringing this other person up, and they handed it off, and they've had so far a pretty smooth transition. This doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's got to be something that you intentionally focus on. And honestly, you should always be pouring into the next generation. You should always be taking somebody with you. And one more thing I need to say here is a lot of us view discipleship more as an educational thing, where we're covering written material or we're teaching things intellectually. And I just got to tell you, that is not the biblical model of Jesus' discipleship. It's hanging out with people and talking real life. And so, you should never go to a conference by yourself. You should never go do a hospital visit by yourself. You should always be raising up somebody that you can hand the ministry off to. And honestly, I don't think it crosses our mind till we get to the end of our ministries. And by then, in many cases, it's too late. It must be an intentional part of ministry. At 95 Network, I've already identified a young man that I want to hand this thing off to in 10 years. And I've already begun to meet with him and work with him. And we've talked about it. And so you got to be thinking strategically that way.
For years, I carried a little card with me in my wallet. Every time I opened my wallet, I saw it, and the card said, "Why are you doing this alone?"
That's so good.
Because I tend to be the guy who just does it by myself, and I had to remind myself constantly. Anytime I open my wallet, why are you? So I'm out on the road. I'm doing something. I'm doing a hospital visit. I got to reach into my wallet. Anytime I did, it reminded me. Okay, next, if I am doing this alone, I need to do it with somebody else the next time.
And the reason we do that often, Sam, is because ministry defines who we are. And it's so important for everyone watching today to understand ministry is not who you are. Ministry is what you do. And the reason we don't equip and the reason we don't raise people up is because we need to be needed. Well, we've got to grow past that. We've got to understand that we are called to equip saints to do ministry. And a huge part of that is to always be raising somebody up. So I think that Karl gave us a great practical tool right there we could use. Everybody needs to put one of those cards in their wallet or on their iPhone as their screen.
Yeah, on the phone now. This was back in the day.
Yeah, it's back in the day.
Wonderful. Yeah. I heard someone tell me that you start thinking about succession on day one of the church, and so
Absolutely.
because
Absolutely.
it's really about anything we do, we're not thinking our lifetime, we're talking generations to come. And so if you're not already thinking about it, today is the day to start thinking about it and praying about it.
Mhm.
All right, now we've gone through the list of questions that we had prepared, so I'm going to go through the chat and see if there's additional questions that we could answer.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think I see one right here. This is from Danny. I pastor an older, small rural church in a growing community rather than decline in a growing community rather than declining. When I came 6 years ago, they were ready to close the church. We have grown, but we are lacking younger families. What is a good way to get the congregation to move towards engaging our community? So I
Carl?
think it's just more about engagement with the community. Yeah.
Yeah, we have the pastor. The pastor, you yourself have to understand what is happening in your community outside the walls of the church. We get too isolated. I'm as guilty of this as anybody, of just spending all my time inside the walls of the church and then inside my own head about that. And the church changes around us, and we don't understand it. We need to approach our community the same way that a missionary approaches going to a mission field. You have to learn the language, you have to learn the culture, and you have to understand that the language and culture is a constantly moving target. It is no longer, every few years you got to look around. You've got to be looking around constantly and asking, because in the last year and a half, especially, we've had 7 to 10 years of change in the last 18 months. Your community is different now than it was 18 months ago, significantly different. You think you know your community, but you only know the places you always go. You need to go to a different coffee shop, a different restaurant, go out to the park, hang out with different people, purposely put yourself in places you're not used to going, and not to sit there and judge it, but to learn from it and to understand how your community talks to each other now and what the culture of your community is. We don't see outside our walls, and we'll never engage them if we don't understand their language.
With that, I think it's important that you literally model what, and do exactly what Karl said. You model getting involved in areas of the community that aren't quote unquote Christian. Go be involved. Go volunteer at some things. Get involved in things in the community that help people see that you get it, that you understand. We've got to get outside of just always doing just church stuff, again, as Karl said, but we model that for them, and that's a great way to do it. And then the other thing I think would be huge for churches is you need to bring in a secret shopper once a quarter, who is in the demographic that you're trying to reach. What I mean is, go to your favorite restaurant and hopefully find maybe someone that doesn't know Jesus, who's in that age group, and offer to pay them $50 or $100 or whatever you have to do in your situation to get them come and get their honest feedback of what their experience was like when they came to your church. You'll learn a lot if you'll just do that and listen to what they have to say.
Great. That's awesome. So we have hit our time at 9:30. It's actually a little bit beyond that, so forgive us, 5 minutes. But for those who have to go, thank you for joining us. We're going to hang out for maybe just, five more minutes just to kind of close everything up. But thanks again for joining us. If you have to go, just wave and we see you. We'll see you next time. And there'll be a lot of resources available that come via email. And so just look out for how to get connected with 95 Network, with Karl Vaters, as well as Purpose Driven. There is a comment on the chat. It's referencing a book called Growing Young. And that's exactly where I got that word from Kara Powell. I do know her, and she has amazing thoughts and leadership on that as well. So I would endorse that book as well. Let's see, setting up the coaching. So there was another great suggestion of volunteering with community things, right? Rather than people volunteering at church, or you being there and seeing where the people are is really great. Let's see. I'm just going to make sure. Okay, so we got through most of the questions. That's great. I mean, we got through all the questions, I think. Stacy, is there anything that we're missing or we missed?
I think we pretty much covered it all. I think there was one. How do you kill programs that are no longer working or meeting a need?
I know the answer.
Okay.
You ready? First, it sounds harsh, but it's not. You starve it. So you don't come in and kill any program that's not working, because that just creates all kinds of problems you don't need to face. So if you have something in your church that's outdated, don't be cruel, don't be rude. One of the huge things that I've learned in my life is that God is not in a hurry. So it's when you turn your church into the right direction, it's like turning an aircraft carrier. I've been told that it takes 11 miles to turn an aircraft carrier. You don't just do that in a moment, and you don't just make a shift today and go, oh well, I watched this webinar and they said we need to do this. And if you do that, you'll be looking for a new job. But just with you have outdated programs, just stop emphasize them as much. Maybe you don't create so much in the budget for them, but don't be mean. Don't just go and step on it and stop it. Over time, just kind of let it fade away. Karl, you've been doing this longer than me in that specific arena. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, before I get to that, I noticed there were a couple of direct messages that came up for me, and I have not been able to answer them. So if you do have something you want to get a hold of me on, go to karlvaters.com, hit the contact button, and you can get a hold of me that way. Um, but yeah, as far as stopping programs, right now is the easiest time in history to stop programs, because if you had to stop them for COVID, just don't restart them.
Yep.
Like, don't be in a rush to load everything back up again. This is a great time to simplify. If you've had to stop something, look at it and go, maybe we're not missing it, and this is the easiest time not to restart again. I think it's great when you do start new ministries, just like we talked earlier, when we asked for volunteers, put an expiration date on their volunteer time, put an expiration date on ministries as well. Like, we used to do a Wednesday Bible study, it was just every Wednesday, and it just got to where it just was a handful of people. Now what we do is we do a Bible study for 6 weeks on Ephesians, and it has an end date. And then we take a break from it for a while and come back again. So as often as possible with ministries, give them an end date as well.
Hugely important.
Awesome. Well, Dale, Karl, as always, we're very appreciative. We never received so many comments and feedback and just words of encouragement from the audiences that watched the 4 weeks of the
Awesome.
the training.
Even on what Dale said?
Yeah, well, I was gonna give you stats separately.
They tolerated me.
No, we don't compare here,
I tell
right?
you, we
no
were so
comparison.
concerned with getting to people's good questions here. We didn't have our usual comedy routine going on today. So yeah.
No, but we do have a spot out about that.
Well, there's tons of resources with the 95 network, as well as Karl Vaters and us at Purpose Driven. So please be on the lookout for the email. I'm sure we'll be able to send the link to this recording if you need to review and kind of go back to it. But again, Dale, Karl, Stacy, myself, we love you. Yes, we love the small church. We love churches. We love the pastors, and we're here to serve. And I hope you guys felt that love from us in the way that we shared our pains and our learnings from our hard times, that it was able to feel like you were seen, that you were known and you were understood, that there was someone else that maybe is just one step ahead of you that's saying, hey, let's keep going. Watch out for that step. Watch out for that step. Don't fall into that pitfall, because I fell into it. It's not fun. And I hope you could feel that love and see that love. And this is not the end. We're going to continue to serve you the best we can. We had a fun comment that says, can we do this every year? We'll see. But yeah, there's so much that Dale's doing with the works that he's doing with the workshops and the podcast, as well as Karl Vaters, with all the resources and the coaching that he provides. Just make sure you reach out to them. They're more than willing and available to come alongside you, and so are we. And so I'm going to close our time up, and I hope that you will get the contact information to reach out to us. We'll have additional resources that will be made available. But before we go, any last word from Stacy, Karl, or Dale before we close up?
Sure. I would just like to invite you all, for those of you who are kind of new to the PD family, we have a monthly Zoom that we do. It's called PD Exchange, and we will send you an invitation to our next, and again, it's done by Zoom, our next call. It's scheduled for November 10th, and the idea behind PD Exchange is to bring you experts like we did with Karl and Dale in particular fields. And so next month, one of the issues that we tend to see happen within all size churches, but a lot more so in a smaller mid-sized church, are sometimes the partnership between the elders and the senior pastor. And sometimes it becomes a little problematic. And so we have invited Dr. Gene Getz. For any of you that know Dr. Gene Getz, He is an expert in his field. He did write a book, Elders and Leaders Within the Church, along with many other books and Bibles. He has his doctorate from Moody Bible Institute. He is a teacher, a professor, and a pastor. And so he will be bringing us some great information about healthy relationships between elders and the senior pastors of churches. So again, that's November 10th. If you want to join us, we'll be sending an email with the invitation to register for that. Dale, Carl, anything you want to add?
We just exist to help you. That's why we do what we do. That's why Karl does what he does. That's why I do what I do. 95 Network, that stands for the fact that 95% of all the churches in our country, at least, are small and mid-sized churches. And so everything on our website, everything we do is specifically designed to encourage and strengthen the small and mid-sized church leaders. So there's tons of stuff there. Just go to 95 Network. The number's 95network.org, and you'll see all the resources there. And then if you don't want to check us out, please check out Karl, because he's just full of so much great wisdom, and I appreciate our friendship and how we get to work together. So
Yeah, we're grateful for the opportunity to work with all of you on this one. I'm especially heartened that big ministry and small churches are working together well for the benefit of everybody. There's been a big small divide in our culture for far too long, and this is part of mending that divide, and I'm grateful for that.
Right. Well, we're trying to model what kingdom collaboration could look like. So then this could be an
You're doing a great job of
example.
it.
And so, well, that's it for our call today. Let me close this out in a prayer, and we'll say see you next time. Okay. So, Father, we're here. We're just so grateful for the technology that allows us to do this. And so we celebrate it and we say thank you for it, because we know this is all what you created. Thank you for allowing us to connect with people and pastors all around the world to be able to share our testimonies of your goodness, of your faithfulness, and of your love. In the things that you called us to do, and in the ways that you taught us to love our community and the people that you called us to lead. And so I continue for blessing and encouragement, peace. I pray for comfort for those who are discouraged. I pray, Lord, that you are the only one that could raise them up and give them the energy and the wisdom and the discernment and just the life and the love that they'll need to carry forward. I pray, Lord, that you just give them a renewed sense of excitement and hope for the future, Lord. And so I pray, Lord, that above all, you just help them to protect their families and their marriages as well, protect them, protect their health, and just continue to bless what you've called them to do. And so, again, I'm just so grateful for just Dale and Karl to be able to just be here and share their wisdom and their stories with our community. So I pray that all this would be for your glory. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 All right.
Thanks,
See
everybody.
ya. Bye, everyone.